So, this morning we are going to continue our series based on the book written by Richard Rohr entitled Breathing Underwater, which takes a deep dive, pun intended, into the spirituality of the 12 steps. And his premise is that if you are in physical form here on this earthly plane, that each one of us struggles with attachments, is another way of saying addictions, right? And that he says the big overarching attachment or addiction, or that something that keeps us out of the truth or true selves, is stinking thinking. And so today we are going to look at step 3. And so step 3 says this: we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Now I know it's written with him, but Richard Rohr speaks of the universal presence of God, of not just being a fatherly figure, but if it's the God of our understanding, you get to choose, and so it's more universal. So breaking it down, let's look at this step. We're going to talk about the God. We've talked about how he defines God and the God of your understanding. How later on we're going to look at how that influences your choices. But I want to take a look at decision and will. Made a decision. We make thousands and thousands of decisions every day. Some of them consciously, some of them are automatic, unconscious choices. And so one of our 12 spiritual powers is our power of will. It is our power to choose, decide, determine, direct, and to be willing. And according to Myrtle Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, she shares this: because you are spiritual beings with the freedom of choice and with the command of power, faculties, and qualities of being, you can determine just what will come into your life. So I want to bring some of the specifics as to what she's speaking of. Your power, your faculties, the capital B, is our spiritual nature. Our 12 spiritual powers. Now, how we operate faith, life, zeal, order, love, will, choice is dependent on where we are residing in our consciousness, right? And so, same is with the power of will. And will also executes how we will choose, how we will show up in faith, in love. And so, we can see that we can be operating, surrendering our will, aka our personal will, which is the will of the false self. The false self is that personality self that we have been domesticated into being based on our gender, our family norms, societal norms, cultural norms, traumas that we had in our life. We create this false self to exist in this world. And we know that we are more than our roles, what our families have told us to be. And so in consciousness, in any moment, we can be operating out of that personality self or that false will, or as Jesus would say, the kingdom of God is within. We can do that deep dive within to center ourselves and to make conscious contact with the God of our understanding, our divine nature, and to choose from that centered place. And so one of the brilliant things that Reverend Paul Hasselbeck has done is to show us that when we are operating out of will, from the ego sense, it is either using will in an undeveloped fashion or an overdeveloped fashion. And so when we are in ego and we are in undeveloped will, it shows up with someone having a difficulty making decisions, wishy-washy, indecisive, kind of advocating their choices to what's going to make other people happy, or what do you want? What does, what does the job market say is the best job for me, rather than what is really alive within me? It also is the shadow side of sacrifice, okay? Where you do things, you make sacrifices in your lives so that you can be seen as wonderful, holy, and the best thing in the world, right? Not from that place of selfless love, which we'll talk about later. It is also about where codependency stems from, right? Because it's always about I'm doing what others want me to do, need me to do, and not checking in if it's in alignment with truth of me. From that overdeveloped, it is when you become bossy, willful. You need to have it your way. It's my way or the highway. And from there, you make sacrifices from the victim consciousness, but it's like, because you know what? My life has been so tough, I deserve this. Nobody's going to get in my way. I'm entitled to this. And it's all, whereas underdeveloped will is all about what other people want. Overdeveloped is that song, it's all about me, 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 right? Do we know any people who operate from that place? I'm sure we have at some point as well. So now we also know when we are centered from within, living in the consciousness of our true self that is always, can never be, we are never separate from God, right? We live in this dualistic thinking that our intellectual minds cannot surrender to that mystery of knowing that we move and breathe and we are the essence of God in expression. And so here's another way of saying that with step 3. We make the decision to go within, to be guided by divine wisdom of my higher self, my higher power, understanding that it is the divine essence of me, of you. That is why the kingdom of God is within. And so when you are making choices from that centered place within, they are life-affirming choices, not only for you, but for the betterment of another. It's in alignment with what you value, honesty, integrity, truth, spiritual truth. The inspirations to use your gift in service rather than, now there's nothing wrong with getting rich, but getting rich in a way where you don't care how it impacts other. You don't care whether you're ripping people off or not. And it is also, the power of will is I choose how I will walk faith, how I will walk love. It's about us and as we. And as Charles Fillmore said, co-founder of Unity, the will is the executive faculty of the mind and carries out all of the decisions of the I am. The I am is the highest place in consciousness. And so for me, the decision, just simple, right? The decision to use PowerPoint and to have slides for me is what's deep in my desire is that this spirituality that we talk about on Sunday, or anytime I talk about it, is practical. Donna said it is where, principle number 5, it is where the rubber hits the road. And so I know that some people have auditory issues or concerns or memory issues or concerns, or people on Zoom can't hear things, right? And so out of the act of love and of this having value, it is why I do this, where some other people may think, I'm just trying to have a classroom and a psychology lesson, or whatever it may be, right? Do you see? Only I can determine what I am choosing and from what place in consciousness I choose this, right? That's just a simple example. And so I'm going to show you in just a moment a clip, right? It is a movie clip from 2016, the movie Fences, that starred Denzel Washington and Viola Davis. He plays the husband, Troy, and I forget her, Rose is her name. So background to this clip. Troy was a great baseball player. He played in the Negro Baseball League, and he was so good, but because of racial discrimination, he wasn't allowed to play for Major League Baseball. The setting of this movie is the 1950s, and it's set as it's in Pittsburgh. So obviously there's racial discrimination, not that we're over that now, but it was even more intense. So as you see this scene, this is when Troy tells Rose that he had been having an affair, and the woman that he's having an affair with is pregnant with a baby. So as you watch this, I want you to look and see from what place in consciousness are Rose and Troy executing their power of will, right? We just went over overdeveloped, underdeveloped. You don't need to know those names, but just where do you see them using how they're using their will, their power of choice?
We ain't talking about baseball. We're talking about you going off and laying up with another woman and bringing it home to me. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about no baseball.
You're not listening to me. I'm trying to explain it to you the best way I know how. It's not easy for me to admit that I've been standing in the same place for 18 years.
Well, I've been standing with you. I've been right here with you, Troy. I got a life too. I gave 18 years of my life to stand in the same spot as you. Don't you think I ever wanted other things? Don't you think I had dreams and hopes? What about my life? What about me? Don't you think it ever crossed my mind to want to know other men, that I wanted to lay up somewhere and forget about my responsibilities, that I wanted someone to make me laugh so I could feel good? You're not the only one who's got wants and needs, but I held on to you, Troy. I took all my feelings, my wants and needs and dreams, and I buried them inside you. I planted a seed and watched and prayed over. I planted myself inside you and waited to bloom. It didn't take me no 18 years to realize the soil was hard and rocky and it was never gonna bloom. But I held on to you, Troy. I held you tighter. You was my husband. I owed you everything I had, every part of me I could find to give you. And upstairs in that bedroom with the darkness falling in on me, I gave everything I had to try and erase the doubt that you wasn't the finest man in the world, and wherever you was going, I was gonna be there with you because you was my husband. Because that's the only way I was gonna survive as your wife. You're always talking about what you give and what you don't have to give. But you take too, Troy. You take and don't even know nobody's giving.
You say I take and don't give.
Troy,
you say I take and don't
Troy,
give.
you hurt my arm.
I don't give you everything I got. Don't you tell that lie on me. Don't you tell that lie on me.
Troy, you hurt me. Troy.
All right. That's strike two. You stay away from around me, boy. Don't you strike out. You living with a full count.
So let's take a deep breath. It's a pretty intense scene. Some of you might be familiar with intense scenes. I myself was married to an alcoholic for many years, and so I know the intensity of what that could be like, right? And Troy does turn to, although I don't know if he was drinking in this scene, he does turn to alcohol. So, how do we see the power of will being executed from the false self, the power of choice? Donna.
From her perspective, definitely underdeveloped ego. She totally put herself aside, and her life was, centrally about him, and totally discarded herself.
Yes, absolutely. The classic, my whole life is surrendered to someone else. And some of the lines that were so powerful, Donna, as you're speaking to that, is that I buried my wants and needs. I planted my seeds inside you, but the soil was rock hard. Right? Anybody else? Anybody on Zoom want to put it in there? Lindy, just wait 1 second.
So on the other side of that dynamic, he has the overdeveloped
Yes.
ego. It's all about him, and I don't know, it's kind of, I don't want to say typical, but it is more usual for that to be the dynamic
Yeah.
in a marriage,
One where there is,
where the man is the overdeveloped and the woman is the underdeveloped.
yeah, and it could be the other way around.
It could be,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
This
Yes.
is kind of more typical.
Right, but or when there's a substance involved or whatever unhealed trauma. So I want to,
So, but speaking to a substance.
Yeah, sure.
85% of men will leave a woman who's actively addicted to a substance, and 85% of women will stay with the man. So that's kind of what
Right.
I'm addressing there. Yeah.
so thank you. Anybody else? Paula?
Relate to the two characters.
Yes.
The topic, the subject's a little different, the matter, the addiction is a little different, but I was her for a lot of years. And then I woke up and I made a decision. I'm not taking this anymore. And I walked away from my marriage. And of course, the moment I made that decision, I thought the ground was going to break open, I was going to like die, or, but it was like, finally, like you wake up and you say, that's enough. I'm not giving up myself, my will, my whatever. It's like, I am exerting my power now, my will. And it took a lot, but I walked away. And
Right.
of course I was, my husband had an addiction of gambling. So I just, I put up with it. Then actually when I made the decision, it felt like a noose came off my neck.
Yeah. Well, that's usually a sign when you're living from false self versus true self, right? When there's that
Almost.
sense of,
And that's when I found myself.
yeah, true self.
And
Yep.
I loved myself then.
Yeah.
And I wanted more. And I wanted my children to have more. And I walked away with nothing. No alimony, no nothing. And I made a beautiful life for my
Yeah.
children. Yet I was accused to be the worst mother, the worst wife, the whole bit. But didn't
All that
matter.
is false,
False.
right?
Yeah. So that's on a personal level. I could so relate.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. And know that we have those aspects of Rose and Troy, maybe not to that extreme, but we all have at some point operated from that underdeveloped state where we lost ourselves in some, or went against what we valued in some way. Maybe not like to this extreme, but yes, made choices, to keep the peace in a family, so to speak, right? And we've also have been in that place in consciousness where we wanted to have something our way, where we were controlling, my way or the highway. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say about why you were late or whatever, because this is how I see it, and that's all that matters, right? So we have, all of us, there are aspects within us. And so we need to make that conscious choice to go within, right? And when we do that enough times, and in the moment we just say, okay, I'm going to take a breath because I can feel resistance happening. I'm feeling frightened right now, so I'm going to just take that deep breath and center myself. And I'm going to be mindful of choosing the next word, the next action, because I'm going to make that conscious contact in that moment to turn my will over. And so what I wanted to also just talk about, right? Rose and Troy's and all of ours, they're fictional characters, but all of us, right? Their false self has been developed and accumulated by familiar, societal, racial, gender, trauma, generational trauma of being a Black person, right? And religious norms, all of us. We don't realize how deep it goes. And so we have this big false self that takes over. And so we're asked to surrender that. And it becomes challenging if the God of our understanding we don't think is merciful or don't have clarity as to what that even means. So I wanted to break down some things about codependency and sacrifice and acts of self-love, okay? And seeing how these play in determining whether you're coming from the sense of false self in making your choices. So codependency is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person assumes the role of the giver, sacrificing their own needs and well-being for the sake of others, the taker. The bond in question doesn't have to be romantic. It could occur just as easy between parent and child, friends and family members. So here is the surrendering, thinking that this person can't make it on their own, or I can't make it on my own. If I don't do it, what will happen? You know, when I was in a relationship with my ex-husband, it came a point where I stopped driving him. He used to play in a band on the weekends, and I hated it. I hated it with every fiber of my being. And I would go because how would he get home? I took on the responsibility that if he drank and got in an accident, somehow that would be my fault, right? Come to know, you know, and within, no, that's not for my highest good. That's not what I'm feeling led to. And he is in charge of his choices, so on and so on. Now, sacrifice. What does sacrifice have to do with this? So the word sacrifice, we all make sacrifices. From what place in consciousness are we sacrificing? So for example, I have money saved aside for European vacation, let's just say, and a member of mine comes down with an illness that might not be covered with insurance. And I go within and I feel led to use that money out of love, right, for this family member. That is an act of self-love because it is about the consciousness of being an act of love. Is it sacrifice? Yes. But sometimes sacrifice comes from having something over someone, right? I did this for you, so you owe me. Anybody ever experienced that or do that in a relationship? But I want to talk about how we've been conditioned by institutional religion about sacrifice. And again, turning our will, false self, and over to a power greater than ourselves, would be challenging if the God of our understanding is not merciful, or we grew up with this belief that we had to sacrifice in a way that was painful. And often in religion, sacrifice on the surface level was the substitute of me having to go within to do the deep work. So, for example, in the time of Jesus, the Mosaic law, Jesus was a Jew, okay? And he would go to the temple. And we know of the story where he goes in Matthew, and he yells and tells them to stop selling things, but he also opened up the pens of the animals, which were the firstborn, to be freed, okay? Because Mosaic law then was, for God, I would sacrifice the firstborn of the animal of my stock for God to be holy. But who cares if I whip somebody in the street 2 minutes later, right? I didn't need to worry about where I was operating in consciousness, false self, true self, right? Because I was sacrificing for God. And then for the firstborn, they got to the point where, no, you're not going to sacrifice your firstborn male, but you can pay the temple, right? And then when Jesus was alive, what is it, the myth that was that he died for our sins? So does that mean that we're all free and we could just do whatever the hell we want? Or was it that because he spoke truth to power in his day, and he stood for the truth, knowing that all of us are equal, all of us emanate from one source, God, and that the kingdom was within, and because he rallied for the people, which was a threat, that's why he was crucified. I surrender my will for thy will. For him not to follow what truth was alive for him would be him not showing up in his own truth. You know what? I'm going to save my life. I'm out of here. See you later. So this is embedded in our theology for generations and generations. And in the book Breathing Underwater, Richard Rohr shares this. False sacrifice is an actual avoidance of any real renouncing of the false self, while looking generous or dedicated. This is also revealed in Jewish insistence, Jesus' insistence, that the temple has to go. The temple is the metaphor for sacrificial religion in his time, and this explains why he vigorously releases the animals penned up for sacrifice and rejects all the selling and buying for God in God's name. Right? Don't eat. I'm not mocking this. This is about coming to understanding what's true for you, what's true and what's myth. Does it mean if I don't have chocolate during Lent, I'm holy? It might. Or am I doing the deeper dive that I eat chocolate or sugar to avoid being in conscious contact in the silence with the God of my understanding? Or I avoid feeling my feelings or having to make a decision that might be hard, and so I go to the escape route. So now I want you to think of, call to mind, Buddha, Jesus, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., St. Francis. Would you say they're all codependent? How many of you would use that word to describe any of them? Anyone? Not I. Right? They are acting, right? Again, it goes from that place in consciousness. The sacrifices or giving their life, meaning, going within, knowing that I need each one of them, their time in prayer, meditation, and soul care was very powerful and palpable. But the burning of the way of the false self, which is what we do when we pray, meditate, read, and live a conscious life, we come to discover that my life is more than the life for me, but it is also about serving something greater, which all of them did. So I wouldn't categorize those. So now let us take a look at selfless acts of love, coming from that consciousness, right? It goes to motivation. I only gave that silly example about the slides before so you can get to, nobody can tell me what my motivation is but me. Where you are in consciousness doing what you're doing, nobody can tell you what that is, right? So when your motivation for doing something is coming from your God self, love thy neighbor as myself, serving from a place of love with no attachment. I don't need your recognition. I'm going to serve on a committee, and I'm not going to worry about who's doing more work than the other. Now, I'm not saying we may not ask people to give more, but when that becomes my priority, that instead of saying, oh, how am I going to invite them into stepping into service by being compassionate and being a model of it, right? Holds others in wholeness instead of seeing them as broken. They know the truth. They know that we're all experiencing the human condition, but I know the truth of you. I know I see you. I know you got this. But I'm here with you, praying with you, supporting you, and is in touch with what they value. Whereas the shadow side of the martyr, so to speak, and sacrifice and codependency is the motivation is not an act of love, but is a motivation to A, gain approval, avoid rejection, or something horrible happening, or fulfill one's own emotional needs through validation that you seek from another. And it serves with an agenda, and it lacks soul care. Emotional exhaustion and or resentment. If you are feeling that when you're doing something, either you're not taking time out for yourself, or you are, the very same situation in your life will look different depending on where you are centered in consciousness. So, Rose, as the movie goes, we get to awaken. We get to say, oh my gosh, I am operating out of my false self, whether you want to call it underdeveloped, you just know when it is, right? I need to surrender this personal will. I need to go in to that which is greater, that is mystery, and also my true self that only knows its oneness. There's no separation. And so Rose, eventually, the mother dies in the movie, and the baby is born, and she decides that she's not going to have certain kind of relations with Troy anymore. She sets some boundaries. She begins taking care of herself, but she makes the selfless act of raising the baby. All from a place of love. Pretty amazing, right? And so St. Francis also, I'm going to share this quote from St. Francis, and I want to speak about his evolution too, because a lot of times we read about saints and spiritual mystics and teachers, and we only know their highest self, and that we don't think they ever face the human condition like we do, right? And so St. Francis shares this, which is also found in Breathing on the Water. When the heart is pure, love responds to love alone and has little to do with duty, obligation, requirement, or heroic anything. It is easy to surrender when we know that nothing but love and mercy are on the other side. Beautiful, isn't that beautiful? So we would surrender if we know the God of our understanding was pure love itself. And in one of the books, Embodied Spirits, that I am reading, it talks about St. Francis's journey into mysticism. And it shares how at one point he was in prayer, that he would have leprosy was a very common thing when he was alive. And so he would get repulsed by lepers. And he would literally get nauseous and vomit. And so he would go into prayer because he wanted to serve them. He wanted to pray with them. He wanted to be among the least among us, love thy neighbor. And so he went into prayer. And there was one day he was nervous, he was upset, and he chose and he walked over and he hugged a leper, and he had a mystical experience. His fear dissolved, and then all of that went away for him. Surrendering, right? The false self, wanting to serve something greater within. And so as we come to a close, we look at step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. First step is being mindful. What place in consciousness do I choose to live and make decisions in this moment? Am I aware of my false self showing itself from my wounds, from my conditioning? Or do I choose to go within to make choices from that which is greater, surrendering to the mystery, knowing I move and breathe and have my being in that which I call God, that which I call Source, that which I call Allah, universal presence. And I close with these, before I close with these 2 quotes. So I just want to say it in this way. It requires us to be mindful of our stinking thinking, of the ego, and make a choice to turn over our will or ego to the care of our true selves. That lives from oneness consciousness, God consciousness. There is no separation. And so I end with these 2 quotes. The first one is from Frederick Bales, who is with Science of Mind, and he says this: our power of choice enables us to think like an angel or a devil, a king or a slave. Whatever we choose, mind will create and manifest. And by Yogananda, we are engaged in an eternal quest for that something else we hope will bring us happiness, complete and unending. For those who have made the choice to seek and find God within, the search is over. God is that something else. Namaste, and have a blessed day.